I'm sure this video has been done a million times as it's a classic group conversation starter. But I recently listened to a bunch of Disgorge, so I figured I'd get a nice easy video out of the outcomes of that. Which Disgorge? Both Disgorge. Given these bands are, well, these bands, obviously this is one that's going to be very hard to use imagery for, so I hope you like bad MS Paint art. I had the idea of making the title card the baby heads from the second albums on the boxes, but firstly, I figured YouTube wouldn't appreciate that in thumbnails, and more importantly, that's the most horrible idea anyone has ever had, and I don't want to make that. It's kind of wild that these two bands with the same name kicked up at around the same time, both in similar styles, both that became big and important names within their niches which largely shared a fan base, both had very similar career arcs, both were pig-headed enough to just stick with the name despite the clash. Mexigorge were even openly angry about the use of Mexigorge to refer to them, so I apologize for calling them Mexigorge. They both have legendary vocalists who broke new ground with toilet noises. They both ended in the mid-2000s, but continue to pretend that they weren't broken up, despite not really doing anything for 2 straight decades. The parallels are endless, so they become a fun little comparison. It's just a fun little bit of early internet-era brutal death trivia. I've made it no secret that I'm more of a fan of gore grind Disgorge than straight brutal death Disgorge. But the Americans are undeniably more influential than their uglier cousins. So I figured to keep this fair, I'd look at each of the bands during comparable periods in their honestly shockingly consistent discography developments. They both started way earlier than you'd expect. They both did some demo stuff from several years before they dropped albums, which are both crazy advanced for their time, but also kind of forgotten about after their follow-ups. They both dropped their big hits with albums 2 and 3, and then both kind of petered out over a few years with largely ignored final albums. They make for good little matchups. I'm going to match up each band in each phase and give the winner an irrelevant point to give us an irrelevant winner. The main point is the reasoning and the distinctions along the way. They're both classics. Who really gives a crap which one I actually like more? I'm not even going to clarify which Disgorge I'm talking about during any of my scoring, simply because I think it's funny. Hamburger Disgorge got going shockingly early. Admittedly, they pulled off the 1992 release date by being extremely Suffocation indebted, with really not a whole lot of their later quirks. There's plenty of regular death metal riffs, the jabby riffing style exists, but they're not really going to have any of that convoluted tech grooving style they'd later be identified by. The vocals are pretty intense for turn of the decade, but they're not really fully fledged guttural vomit yet either. They are a thrashy and tremmy up-tempo outpourings. The grooves are pretty straightforward mosh monsters. It's a hell of a demo. They were absolutely one of the most competitive first-wave Suffocation sycophants, and there's really not many places you could go for more in their style done as well at the time. With that said, it really is quite removed from what they go on to be defined by, even with the opener showing up in the fully formed She Lay Gutted in 1999. A couple of the grooves at the end of Prolong Anoxia do start pushing up on it a little bit, but really, it's just an excellent demo which is of its era. Its importance comes from the quality more than the novelty. They did put out a second demo in 1995, which is ironically much more important while also being completely not worth tracking down specifically. This demo is a lot more developed down their path. They're doing the super complicated, tech grooving thing now, and it definitely sounds like real Disgorge. In isolation, it's a crazy important release. It's really the most developed into modern brutal death metal that you can find in 1995. But their debut sticks it on the end. Like, not just reuses the tracks. Half of it is literally the demo tracks copy-pasted from 1995. So, assuming you've checked out the big full lengths, you've already heard it. And it's kind of retroactively tied to 1999, since that's easily the most common way to experience it. El Disgorge was a smidge later getting stuff out, and it wasn't as well developed as a product. They have a number of promos and rehearsals which sound like total shit, and are kind of scattered all over the place as dodgy tape rip bootlegs, so it's nowhere near as neat to sum up. They have a compilation, but it doesn't always feature the entire demos, and multiple tracks appear on multiple releases depending on whether it was a rehearsal or a promo or an outright demo, so it's hard to be certain to know which version you've found, and it's all just messy as hell. The two releases that I'm sure that I can cover in full are Through the Innards along with Blood and Pus Emanations. But there are a number of scattered promo and split tracks that are around also. I'm thinking about them in this, but I'm not going to talk about them. Given how Brutal Death forward their debut full-length is before incorporating more of the gore grind on the sophomore, it's a little bit surprising that they basically started with the gore grind more up front, mixed with only a few more standard death metal parts. There are bursts of extremely fast blasting, but they're just that, bursts, with most of it being fairly muddy, clunky, slower grinding. The vocals are extremely bottomed out, but it's really not really identifiable as the same band. To be honest, the first demo is not very good. You can tell they were still figuring out the quick micro-elite riffing style that they'd be known for, so that's vaguely interesting, but they weren't doing it fast enough to be exciting or long enough to be brain-dissolving. The promo tracks I've heard sound a lot better, but that's not really saying much. I guess we weren't drowning in quality gore grind in 1995, but I mean, it's really not something that you'll put on to mix up listening to Reek of Putrefaction for the 100th time. Pus and Blood Emanations is a lot better, but it is a handful of demo versions of debut tracks, so I don't know how much to count them as part of the prior era. It's muddier and filthier than the actual album, which is neat and all. I actually think these tracks might sound better in this version, but, it's advertising for the record rather than a glimpse of what they were cooking up in the before days. This one's pretty easy to give away. Disgorge have two awesome EPs, one right on the cutting edge and one being groundbreaking and new, with a solid argument as for why one of them isn't worth listening to, but it was still important at the time. Disgorge, on the other hand, have a piece of crap, some scattered random songs, and one ripping demo which is mostly just advertising for the debut. There's no doubt about it, Disgorge crushes Disgorge in this one. Mexican Disgorge's debut is quite surprising given what they go on to be just a few years later. There's definitely some gore grind in it, but honestly, it's more like Symphonies of Sickness meets Butcher to Birth than the noisy chaos they go on to be defined by. I suppose given it was still early 1997, it would be a little unfair to expect them to be pushing the limits of genres that were still in their formative stages at the time, but it is a big step away from what they'd be remembered for. There are some big melodic licks and some quieter moments scattered around. The grooves are pure mosh bait. There's even a straight up two-step to dance to in Lymphatic Orgy. Pretty much all the riffs are upfront and intended to be catchy, with even the wildest parts still being comparable to those high-speed, cryptopsy, panic transition squawky riffs. This isn't to say that's a bad thing. This is a really nice slab of fun, catchy, riffy, brutal death with some absolutely disgusting vocals. The gurgling, clicking grossness takes center stage a lot of the time, despite the really strong riff set, just by being so out there and gross. It's something that sits nicely around early Deeds of Flesh, Regurgitation, or Mortal Decay, with only a few hits of there being something way, way nastier waiting just down the line. It's not something you would uniquely identify as the band immediately, but it's a real good early brutal death metal time regardless. American Disgorge, on the other hand, pretty much had their sound worked out from their very first record, to the point that I'm being a little unfair to them by not just calling it part of their golden era, because it absolutely is. It does live in a weird definition dead zone, as half of it is a demo compilation that's just been given full-length status, so I'll use that as my cover argument. The stuff off the 1995 demo is more recognisable as something from the early 90s than the first half. Hell, there's one riff with some thrash left in it at one point at the start of the last track, but by and large, they had the idea figured out already. It's mostly pure, full-grown Disgorge. The album itself is 4 new tracks bolted in front of the songs from their 1995 demo, which makes it easy to understand how they dropped their follow-up within the same year after taking 7 years to make a debut. And I mean that literally. They didn't re-record the tracks, they just put the demo tracks on the end. It's a hard shift in production and overall proficiency halfway through. There's a lot of suffocation still in their sound, but they don't do the pure tempo-driven stuff so much. Instead, they take a focus on the grooves and make them even choppier and shifting in terms of tempo and structure. And they're really good at it, showing off a lot of tricks to keep the core sound fairly entertaining throughout, despite it having such a narrow scope. The drumming is phenomenally dynamic with a mix of straight grooves, ultra flashy fill work, and interrupting double-time blast intrusions to keep things from feeling too slow. The newer content has some forward-facing bass leads, which absolutely inspired Defeated Sanity. Matty Way's deep enunciation, phobic toilet gurgles are fully formed and perfectly performed. He's basically the number one influence for Brutal Death vocalists over the last 25 years, and he's on song right out of the gate. This stuff is the default core of most underground Brutal Death these days for a reason. It's a melding of the groove and heavy mash you get from mid-paced groove riffs, paired with the insane skill and choppiness you get in lavish tech riffs, and it works. It's something which you can slot into almost any style within the genre, and it'll fit in just fine. It's a groundbreaking, important record. As for the competition between the two albums, Cranial Impalement is absolutely the more impactful record. Although it's sharing its release year with the far more iconic follow-up and being half demo does leave it a little bit less remembered than it could be. I actually like the giant production shift midway through. It's kind of like a split with similar sounding bands. It adds some variety without the band actually needing to use any variety. As far as pure enjoyment goes, I do like Chronic Corpora Infest a little bit more. It has a lot more stylistic variety because it's still not fully conceptualized yet. There's a lot more riff styles from song to song, while Cranial is basically two riff types rapidly jolting between each other. I also like the varied vocal approach, even though Amerigorge's vocals are also outstanding. I like that it has a little bit more down-the-line speed adrenaline rush to it, while the 1999 release is a little more bogged down into a more moderate tempo, even though the playing is more technically demanding. On the other hand, it is less representative of the band, so when looking at the discography, it is less likely to be an interesting historical detail. It's tough to compare a lightly preferred listening experience and discography novelty to a more revolutionary showing of a classic sound, which happens to also kind of be a reskinned compilation. It does make it a little bit of a coin flip, but in the end, I've got to give the point to Disgorge. With the Disgorges now on even footing, we're up to comparing each band's golden eras. Both are 2 records long, which again makes for neat and tidy battling. We'll start with American Disgorge thanks to them getting She Lay Gutted out in the same year as the debut. This is possibly the most important record in brutal death metal history. Before Disgorge, brutal death was largely just extra chromatic death metal and barely worth getting a genre name just to itself. Or maybe it was just a side effect of technical death metal bands getting extra mechanical and showing off their skills. She Lay Gutted is the flashpoint of where brutal death became unequivocally different from regular death metal. They're not really doing much different to what they were doing on the debut, but it's actually a single recording this time, giving it a more professional sheen. There's next to nothing left here from the early 90s, so it's entirely their brand of moderately tempoed but extremely quickly played, snaking jabby chugs and grooves with billions of tempo shifts. It's heavier and even more hyper-focused on this sound, making it even uglier than ever before. This is what brutal death metal sounds like at its core from now on. So with all that respect and reverence I have for this album, I've got to say that I like the debut more, and it's not very close. I think the first half of the debu's production is just straight up better, and the massive demo drop-off in that regard at least gave it dynamics. That lack of dynamics is the big thing which gets me with this one. Almost the entire album is made up with these snaking grooves, and they're so technically adept and scattershot that most of the riffs don't actually groove for me, and Way's vocals sync up with what's going on just way less. I mean, he was never saying words, but his gurgle burps were still really fun and moved around with the wild music. On this one, he's just kind of vomiting and lets whatever's going on just happen. It's way less catchy than the first one. The production is also really bad to my ears. The guitars are dry as hell and drowned out by the drums and vocals, and those drums. I hate the bass triggers on this. They're not like full 2000s plastic, but they are super loud and really tight and jabby, and they dominate the mix with the snare being all small and binky. There's a reason why the modern new standard elite sound goes through a ping snare. My favourite track is easily Woundful of Scabs, and that one's from 1992. It's the only one which does full-blown, fun-time mosh grooves, and there's even some straight blast and trem momentum, which is sorely lacking from the rest of the record. Basically, it's the only one which still sounds a lot like Suffocation Worship. It's not remotely as wacky, groundbreaking, or confrontational as everything else, but it sounds better to me. Their third album from 2002 is again an act of refinement. While Chile Gutted hyper-focused their sound into a maximal exploration of their messy savagery, Consume the Impure is an attempt to be a little bit more musical and accessible with it. It'd be pretty dismissive to say that they were compromising what they were going for in any way, but it is an easier, more well-rounded album than the prior one. Their production is a little bit cleaner, it's certainly still fairly grimy, but it is absolutely a professional job which shows the technical skill involved in these incredibly detailed riffs. While this does highlight the technicality there's also a lot more simple grooves mixed in with all the super wonky ones to give it a little bit more straight-ahead, easy moshing fun. They bring the up-tempo suffocation riffs back in, so it's not as relentlessly locked into one sound, and give some periods of pure adrenaline release. My issue with Chile Gutted is that it's so focused on their unique idea. They did that techie, upper mid-paced, unpredictable groove thing years before anyone else, and way more elaborately than anybody else. But it's all they did. Bands that followed were able to borrow that idea and bolt other stuff onto it, resulting in more dynamic and exciting albums. Disentomb mix it with overt tech death parts. Brodequin used it as the tonal break between the hyper-blasting tempo fetishism. Stabbing toned down the complexity and make something super moshable out of it. Defeated Sanity added a bunch of jazz technique. You can bolt this stuff onto any form of serious brutal death and it'll work really well. There's a reason why it shows up in so many bands. But on its own, it's a bit limited as the whole product. Consuming the Impure is their album where they took this lesson on board, and I think it's pretty great. It reminds me a lot of Disentomb without the slams, with the upfront technicality and the use of speed and mosh grooves to break up the formula. It's not as important or a cooler record because it's not as pure, but I think it's an infinitely more entertaining record to listen to. But that's enough peak Disgorge for now. Let's listen to some peak Disgorge. The cover arts are a nice representation about what's different between these bands. Chile Gutted is a nasty album for sure, but it's still very professional and thoughtful. It's an artistic statement, so they have a nicely painted depiction of a horror that is scarcely possible for a human to conceive. And then Forensic comes along and says, hey, here's a real photo of it, because it's not an artistic statement, it's an assault. While the Red, White and Disgorge's golden era was a process of refinement and polishing a concept, the Mexican Disgorge's one is a complete reimagining of what the band is. Forensic is by far the biggest individual stylistic leap we'll see from either band. Gondola hooks, catchiness, and riffs. All we have now is filth. The gore grind is turned way up, and huge chunks of the album are now just basically indecipherable guitar mud with blast beats and insane vocal gurgling. And it is awesome. While Chile Gutted influenced basically every band in existence, this basically just influenced Last Days of Humanity and Viscera Infest. A worthy batch of competitors for sure. It's still a step back from that level of utter violence, which in a lot of cases results in stuff I find a little bit too intermediate, while I tend to gravitate towards the full send stuff, but I actually really like that this drops back into actual music every now and then. It's something to reorientate you and remind you what music is actually meant to be, so when it drops back into the madness, it just hits just like it was new. The bursts of sanity give it a chance for the overstimulation to keep working. The band's third effort, Necrolocaust, is something of a regression from the pure noise, but not to the extent of the debut. It's still muddy and insanely fast, but there's just enough clarity that you can make out what's being played and that there are actual riffs happening all the time. Much like the debut, there's a lot of transitional cryptopsy mini riffs in what they're playing, which results in a high count of fun moments, but not many world beaters. It's raw enough that you need to pay attention to really pull out the riffs, but it's fairly rewarding to do so since the detail does exist. They are super fast and just kind of scratch around the fretboard in a similar panicked manner to one another, so there aren't a whole lot of standout peak ones to find, but it is fun doing the excavation. It is a little annoying when they do find the odd ripper, like a couple of the rapidly shifting ones at the start of Boiling Vomit, where they'll just move on to something else immediately, just like it was any other riff. It's like they've gotten so used to making detail irrelevant noise that they forgot to identify when they have an actual doozy. This does, however, leave it a little bit less satisfying as a passive noise vibe experience. It's not quite as overwhelming, and it doesn't trigger that noise death sensation where your brain just kind of shuts down trying to process all the various stimuli. So it's not quite as good as a have it running while you fold laundry album. It also makes the more focused listens a little extra exhausting, since you're getting so many new riffs every 4 seconds, and they still do the hyperspeed parts for minutes at a time. They do maintain the occasional break into actual music structure, which on one hand works well because this has easily the best chaos interruption material they've ever written. I love the campy horror movie leads that pop up into a few tracks, most notably the incredible opener, but there's also a handful of fairly busy, albeit still fairly sloppy noodly parts, and some pretty effective moshes in there too. Just with the fast stuff not being as tonally led, these breaks don't hold quite as much structural value. This is probably the album of theirs that has aged the worst of all of them. The debut isn't crazy forward thinking, but that mid-90s brutal death sound really isn't revisited that often, so it's still pretty novel to hear as a time capsule. Forensic holds up as an important entry into the history of metal being used as weaponized sound. This one was still pretty top-of-the-line aggression and chaos for 2003, but it's a bit more recognizable as just very fast, brutal death metal, and as such has a lot more direct competitors. And there are a lot of bands which have absolutely crushed this style out of the park. This is my favourite of theirs growing up, and now it'd probably be sitting around the debut. Round 3 is another tough one where there's a pretty clear winner in influence, but I like the other pair more. With that said, both sets have clear best records within them, so it's not as simple as one band having two absolute stunners and being able to wipe out all other factors with that. I'm still going to go with Disgorge regardless of that dilemma, however, but it is a coin flip. And finally, we have each band's final albums, which they have pretended were not their final albums. Despite that one similarity, the send-off each band had could not be more different. Kelly Gorge were the first of the pair to get their final hurrah out. And honestly, shit fucks. Parallels of Infinite Torture is more or less a continuation of what they were doing last time, except it's produced more drably and lightly, it's a little bit more catchy, it's noticeably less brutal, but makes up for it by being even more technical. Oh, and it's 15 minutes too long. I really like this one. It may actually be my favourite album by the band. The production and length do harm it quite a bit, but the drumming in particular is extremely enjoyable on this one. They've always had very complex interplay between the shifting guitars and drums absolutely popping off trying to keep it all in check, but with the music being a little catchier, this keeping up type of drumming has resulted in a shockingly tuneful type of percussion. These weird and wacky tech sequences will even out for the last little segment, and I'll do these quick little snare rolls and well-timed pauses to close out the phrase, and it just sounds nice, you know? It's musical. That niceness may be the reason why this one isn't talked about as much as the first three, since it is definitely an easier listen than all of those. But I think it holds up really well. It's technically a long way above a lot of the bands operating in this space, and yeah, that drum performance gives it a type of catchiness the band has never really had much of an interest in without sacrificing their identity at all. It could be heavier for sure, but that's as much a production issue as a cost of getting more listenable. It may have not added much to their legacy, but it absolutely did not take anything away from it either. Sadly, our southern entrant did not bow out with such understated grace. It's understated because no one gives a shit about this album, and it's not quietly just an unfairly overlooked piece that lives up to their earlier standards, it's just meh. While the first three albums were all stylistically mobile, Gore Blessed to the Worms is just a worse Necrolocaust. It's a little slower, it's a little cleaner again, there's more interruptions to the fast stuff, and the fast stuff is not incomprehensible at any time. It's not an unlistenable record by any means, but it's probably the only thing covered in this entire video that I'd say isn't worth listening to. There's nothing unique about the record to make it interesting. It's just a lesser version of one which already exists. I've got to say, when Disgorge has won these matchups, they've been no-brainers. And when Disgorge has won them, they've been coin flips. Our final round is as easy of a win as any of them has been. I wasn't even pre-planning to end up with a draw here, but I'm glad that it did, because this whole protest has given me a clash between acknowledging reality and my personal tastes. I like Mexican Disgorge a lot more than American Disgorge. I find them more fun and viscerally disgusting with all the speed and noise. They're just a lot more up my alley. But American Disgorge are a better band. They're more groundbreaking, they're more consistent, more skilled, more influential, and they kept a steadier line through their discography from start to finish, even if I'm a big baby who doesn't have any fun with the album with the little baby on it. All in all, my final vote-splitting call is that the winner is Disgorge. Let's all give a warm round of applause and a wholehearted congratulations to Disgorge. You win a sticker. Although, despite my self-assured and very clear finalisation, I can't lie. I've been hiding something. There are more Disgorges. There are many more Disgorges. Sure, none of them match the same career arc, most of them aren't even brutal death, many of them barely even released any music, but some of them have some fans and are solid bands. Could I really say that I've been thorough if I don't factor in all of these ones as well? It'd be unprofessional of me to not stop and consider that maybe the best Disgorge is Swedish Disgorge. No, they're not.